So again, welcome to today's session. We are covering two features, weather data, bringing in our weather data into ARM trials, and then using ARM to print labels for a variety of functions. So our first feature, we'll kind of just dive right into ARM and the scenario here, I guess the primary one. Within the site description of an ARM trial, we have a section for weather to document the weather conditions that the trial experienced throughout the trial season. And so here on this weather section, there is a repeating section table. It has a lot of columns to define quite a few different aspects of weather. Not that you necessarily need to fill in each and every one, but I have a feeling if you have something you want to document, there's a good chance you'll find it here. And so the idea of this table is that for every day, typically you would do daily weather, or I suppose you could do weekly or something as well. But at the smallest level, every day would be a separate row in this table to fill in the weather conditions for the trial. So of course, you can do copy and paste if you have an Excel spreadsheet with that information. ARM will let you paste information in, but that can get a little slow going. So we actually have kind of an automatic importing that is possible to do. So that's the feature I want to show today. Here on the toolbar, we have the little weather button. Also from the tools menu as well, there's the function to import weather data. And today I'm going to focus just on the importing it into the current trial that we have open. Just know that there is kind of a batch import as well. Pretty much everything we do today will apply to multiple trials as well. If you can do the same setup, and then instead of just this one trial we have open, the study list will appear and you could choose maybe 3 or 4 different trials at your one location that would all have that same weather conditions, and you can do the same process with. But to keep it simple here, I'm just going to import into this current trial. And so we see the weather import dialog, and we really are working with connections here. So the first one in this list is kind of an automatic connection to the DTN ClearEgg. Originally it was Iteris ClearEgg, and then DTN purchased that group. And so it's just an API call essentially. So if you have a subscription to their ClearEgg weather station is probably not the right word, the weather service, then ARM can kind of integrate directly with them. And just within the settings, you put in your account information and it can connect right up to the internet and import weather. Kind of just a real specific one out in the industry. For us, just historically, that was our way to get our foot in the door with this functionality and really understand what we needed to do. So there's nothing from our world here in ARM, nothing particularly special about this other than just it was a group that was interested in working with us, and it helped us to kind of create this functionality. But once we had that initial setup, then we were able to build off of that function and create a custom connection. So really, this is the idea now that, well, maybe you don't use DTN. Of course, there's quite a variety of other weather stations and capabilities to obtain weather data. And so we wanted to be flexible and give you the ability to define your own connection. Essentially, we're training ARM to recognize the format of your weather spreadsheet. So it can recognize the columns of information in that table. So that way it can bring in the information that's contained in that spreadsheet and put it into the trial where it belongs. So that's really what we're doing here, is going to define our own connection. And just for today's purposes, I'm just going to show my folder here. I have a folder on my computer that I am working from, and I have a more or less a made up export from a fictitious weather station called Daily Export 2, and it has a bunch of rows of weather information kind of summarized for each day from like I said, a made up weather station. And so that is what we're going to utilize as our example. And this you would use whatever spreadsheet format that you would have. And so just kind of walking through the steps here to set this up. The connection name is just what you want to call it. So what it will look like in this drop down. So I'm going to call it, our webinar station daily. Whatever you want to give that name to. And the source will just be matched up with the weather table here. There's a column called source. So this is just showing us that personal list if you wanted to have that filled in when you utilize this connection. Kind of the biggest selection here is the type of connection that we have. So far, I've really just talked about daily weather summarized at each day. When we're done with this, we'll show the other option. We can actually even use hourly weather to look up a specific hour for our application times. So we'll do that quickly after this first discussion with the daily weather. I think it's a little more straightforward to visualize here with the daily. So then this next section is all about the formatting of information in our CSV, our exported file from our weather station. So we can have different settings, something like the date. Date and time is very important for us to figure out when things occurred. And it's entirely possible that that CSV export has a particular format that may or may not match what you're used to seeing in ARM. And it wouldn't make sense to make you change your date settings in ARM just to match the spreadsheet. So instead, we kind of have this option to specify what the format would look like. So in my case, I have the month and then the day and then the year is the format, and they are separated with a slash. And you could simply open up your CSV file to see what the format is for you. Mine is just a 2-digit year, so I'll leave this off. I don't think the time matters a ton since it's daily, but it is in 12-hour instead of a 24-hour. The CSV file itself, just depending on where you are in the world, may have different delimiters. So here in the US, mine will have a comma as the separator in between the different values in my table that basically makes the columns. And then the decimal is a period. Being in the US, we're usually backwards from about 80% of the world. So these options, of course, you'll want to set according to what is in your file and kind of in your typical region settings. Finally, we have default units. So, depending on your spreadsheet, sometimes you might not have a column specifically dedicated to what the precipitation is in. You just know I always deal in centimeters. And so this is a way then for when ARM brings in precipitation information, what unit should it fill in that table? As you can see, for example, the moisture is the amount of moisture, and then we have a unit for that moisture value. So this will fill it in if you don't have a specific column with that associated in that spreadsheet. So for me, I'm going to choose our goofy imperial units, inches and Fahrenheit here. It's kind of what we deal with here in the States. And if you won't, I won't have any wind speed or the shortwave radiation. So if you don't have any of those that you'll be importing, then of course we can ignore those and leave those blank. So again, we're just kind of setting up so ARM can know what to expect formatting wise of the information in that output. On the right half here then is really the training part of ARM to show ARM what the CSV looks like. And so this is just a table where you can put in the headings from our spreadsheet. So, if I had date and time and, rain, whatever the headings in my spreadsheet are, I could type them kind of one by one here. Might take a little while, possible I make a typo. Much easier to use the read headers from CSV. If I click this button, I can actually browse out. I'm going to go to that folder here we looked at a minute ago where I have my CSV, and ARM can read this CSV file, not necessarily to bring in the weather yet, but just to see what the headings look like. And so what that does is it reads that spreadsheet here. Let me just open this up so we can kind of see just what this looks like here. So this is my spreadsheet. And we can see that actually my headings that I care about the most here aren't the very top. I have some kind of fluff information at the very top that isn't necessary. So really row 3 is the one that I care about. This has all of my headings that I want ARM to be able to recognize. So if that's the case for you, that's this header row number. And if I go up to number 3, you'll see this table is updating. So now ARM has automatically filled in the headers. So it can now kind of recognize the order and the text of that heading. So that way it can keep track of that information that's in those columns whenever we bring in the data. All right, so I'm going to click OK. Then we have this set up nicely for what our spreadsheet will look like. Then the final step to kind of solidify this connection would be now to map those columns in our spreadsheet with where they should go within the ARM trial. So for example, of course, the column called date, if I bring this drop down here, we can see all of the different headings in ARM, and naturally date lines up with date. That was pretty straightforward. But some of these then don't always line up one-to-one. So temp high is what we have called, is what it is called in our spreadsheet. And I want to tell ARM to take information in temp high and put it in max temp. Then my spreadsheet has a kind of a time stamp for the time of day that the max temperature was reached. We don't really have a spot for that in ARM. I don't really need to bring that in. So I'll just leave that row blank and move to temp low, which would be min temp. And so we can just continue on selecting the columns from our spreadsheet. So again, we're kind of looking at, obviously not specifically this data, but kind of planning ahead for this information should go in what column in ARM. And then this information should go where, and then stuff like this timestamp here, we just don't need. And so we can continue on with each one that matters. RH would be relative humidity. And so this would be high, would be maximum, low would be minimum, and the average would be average. Rainfall is a nice one just to point out. This moisture total looks pretty good to utilize, but it actually is kind of a calculated column over here that automatically adds up what is listed in precipitation and irrigation together. So really something like the rainfall here would best fit under precipitation. And then we will see when we bring it in that actually the moisture total column will also be updated for us based on the contents of that precipitation. And then the cumulative rainfall we do not want because we have just the daily weather records, so that we don't have a spot for the cumulative. So there's a little save button up here that will save that last step we just performed to make this connection. And so it's kind of important to note that the steps so far up to this point is really kind of a one-time process to train ARM to recognize the format of a weather spreadsheet that you get. Of course, if you have multiple weather stations, or maybe the outputs that you can generate from your weather station, maybe there's a variety of them that have different headings in different rows, then you would repeat some of this for those different ones, and you could give each one of them a different name. But really, the kind of a one-time setup per template, if you will, of that spreadsheet. Then the easier part for us to do is simply when we are in a trial that we want to bring in data from a spreadsheet to, we would start with the connection, and we would choose the connection we just built. And actually, I'm going to choose one I built previously just to make sure I didn't mess anything up. Looks like it didn't include the relative humidity, but not a big deal. Just to make sure it matches up with my spreadsheet. But you would choose that connection name. And then we have a few options for controlling specifically what information from our spreadsheet will come into this trial. So if I already kind of chose a particular set of, a date range in my spreadsheet, that maybe my weather station allowed me to pick specific dates. So I did that and I already kind of have my target. Then I can certainly just bring in all of the weather data, for all of the days. ARM can be a little more specific if you want to. It can read, and based on the date in each row, you can choose a specific range to bring into this particular trial. And these date ranges here are actually based on the trial I have open. So of course I keep reusing this, so it's a 2017 date. Hopefully yours would be 2022, but it's actually reading the initiation date or the date of, I think, first application, kind of the first, whatever first action within the trial if you don't have initiation date. And then kind of the same thing with the last date, whether it's the completed date because the trial is finished, or whatever the last assessment was, or the last whatever ARM can find, to at least give you a starting point for the date ranges you would want. So that can be nice to be specific to the trial. It's especially helpful if you're using that batch import that we mentioned when we started, because then you can use that, and for each individual trial that you've chosen, ARM, when importing, can specify different ranges according to the dates in that trial, which is kind of nice. And then to go with that, there are options to say, well, okay, that starting date is great, but I'd like maybe a 2-week lead up. So 14 days before that first initiation date, I'd like to have all the data that early, or I need to have another 3 days after the final day, whatever you would like to add on to those default dates. Again, kind of a little more useful in that batch scenario, because here I could certainly always change this date if I needed to. to be a different date if I wanted in a single trial setting, but this can be helpful when doing that batch import. And then finally, the last option here is to insert weather data to blank weather fields. So essentially, we're not going to add anything to the table. We are just going to look for whichever dates are already filled in the weather table and just look to see if there's anything we can fill in. So maybe I had already brought in my irrigation information, for example, and then I just wanted whatever other weather information went with those dates. So I already kind of had the table partially filled out with a little information, and I just kind of want to bring over the top if I need to. So some flexibility in how you want to bring those in. I'm gonna stick with this date range just to show what happens here then when we click OK. Now it's going to ask me to find the file that I have the weather data to bring in. So earlier when I did this, I was really just looking to read the header information to build the connection. But now I'm actually looking in the contents of the file that I'm choosing here to actually import that weather information. All right, so a little progress bar, didn't take terribly long. And here, let me turn on precipitation so we can see maybe irrigation as well. So for each date in that range that we had specified, we now see a row in our weather table. We brought in that precipitation information with our default unit we chose. And you can see then that this moisture total was kind of auto-filled in based on, it would add precipitation plus irrigation. Of course, at the moment, irrigation is empty. But if I were to like throw in a 1 inch here or something like that, then it would update. But then just as whatever columns we had selected and matched up, then we have ARM put that information in, and then of course anything that we did not match up is empty. So that's the weather connection, specifically the daily option. The other functionality that we kind of alluded to with the hourly weather. So if you might be the same weather station could give you in an hour by hour. So usually the spreadsheet is much longer. Every hour it has a line in the table. You can utilize that to really just look up specific points in time, specifically for your applications. So here in this trial, I have 4 applications set up, kind of strewn about on the same day by chance, and we had a start time and a stop time entered for each of them. Doesn't really matter what we were actually supposedly doing, but the big thing is that we have all of this weather information that we can have documented about the application. And we can use our weather station to fill that in. So we would really do the exact same thing, import weather data to this trial, but instead of, so we would of course want a new connection, but instead of the daily weather, we would be doing application weather, and it would be looking hourly. Instead of going through this whole process again, I'm going to cancel and just use my preset connection here. But if I bring in my settings, we'll just show that it really did the exact same thing as we did previously to understand what the map or the spreadsheet will look like. And the one key difference is when we are over on this section to connect the information in our spreadsheet to ARM, the list here is different. because now with application weather, we are looking to the weather information on the application description instead. So we need to connect a date in order to look up and find the right day information. And then it's a matter of just connecting up temperature, relative humidity, wind speed, things like that. And you'll notice for a lot of these, so something like the air temperature, we actually have, the air temperature at the start time and at the stop time as two separate cells. And so ARM will do the same thing for us. We really only have to choose one of them. Here I chose at application start time, and it'll do both. It'll do the end time as well if I have both a start and a stop time defined in my application. So just to open up that other spreadsheet, there it goes. It looks similar with just a little bit different information, but it does have, you'll notice every day has a bunch of different rows because it's actually every hour in the day. So we're essentially, ARM is going to look up by date and time according to the start or stop of our application, and then grab just the specific information that we've chosen and put it into this trial. So I'm going to click OK and browse to that location. All right, so here we can see now that we brought in that information, again, specific to the hours, the start and the stop, as defined in the spreadsheet. So just another shortcut if you have that information, if you have a weather station available to you to pull that information, then you don't have to look up in the spreadsheet yourself, have ARM do it instead. And then again, repeat this for all of the trials that you have, especially if they're all at the same location. You can use that same weather file, and then also you can use the same connection. And these connection files, when you set them up, they are just in your, they're close to your GDM def folder. I think they're actually in one level up in the ARM def folder. They're called a WMAP file. So just like what we do with report sets or SEs, they're just little files that live on your computer. And the positive side of that is they're easy to share. So if I had several people in my group that are all doing this, I could easily send this in an email and have them put it in this same folder on their computer, and they could use that connection as well. So they don't have to bother with the whole setup, and they can just start importing, assuming they've got that same weather station output. So hopefully a good time saver for those that have access to that. All right. Any questions on the weather import? Very good. All right, so that is our first topic today. Moving to the second one, which is labels. So within ARM, we have the ability to generate and print a few different types of labels. And so in ARM, I guess we really kind of have them grouped in 4 different types in general: container, plot, seed packet, and harvest. Within those, there's a lot of different options depending on what information is on them and how it's formatted. Some of them have barcodes on them. If you have a barcode scanner that you'd want to use for things like assessments, we also have subsamples that you can generate. We'll kind of walk through and just show an example of each of those in a moment. And really what we'll kind of step through is really all it is to it. It's really setting your label size or choosing the template of the label that you have that you want to print onto, and have ARM match that as well. And then ARM can generate those labels and you can send them right to your label printer. And just a tip before we get to it, because I always forget once we're in the ARM, when we get to the previewing and talking about printing it out, one trick can be kind of the first time you're using a new set of labels, it can work good to print out the very first one out to just regular paper and then set it on top of your label, just to make sure that it is matching up like you want, so that way you don't waste a sheet if it isn't quite right. So let me, in ARM, I'm just going to close this weather trial and open up this other trial instead. Not that there's anything terribly exciting about it, but our labeling here is actually just found in the print reports dialog. I think that's one confusing part. We've got a lot of tools kind of stuffed in this print reports. It doesn't always sound like it would be the very first place you would go to look. But here in the print reports for a trial, we actually have a section called labels. And if you click the little plus sign next to the word labels, we actually get to see all of the different labels that we have. And there is a great number of them. And you can see we've kind of made separators for those different types we just talked about. And so basically each one of these items is just a different format for a label. And the name is usually pretty short, but tries to give an idea of what it is. In this case, this is a brief container label. Looks like it must also include the spray volume on its contents. And we are getting one label for each treatment line. Kind of the easiest way to see what you're getting into on one of those is actually using the report preview tab here right on the screen. So here's a nice way to see actually what we have kind of defined here. So this is just a predefined, we're going to fill in the trial ID, treatment application codes, and sure enough, there's the spray volume. So you can kind of tell how some got built. That here's the brief container. I'm guessing it's going to look similar, but just no spray volume. Looks like it's the mix size instead. And so if you keep this report preview on, it can kind of be a nice way just to keep clicking through this list and kind of comparing, okay, what is different here? It looks like this has got like a material ID. I have no idea what that is. So you might find some that don't really have what you need or have far too much information that you don't need. But you can use that preview to kind of see what you're getting into and whether it'll be a good fit for your label. So if I go back to the report options, in fact, it probably would have made more sense to do that first. We can define in ARM what the format of that label is. How many columns on our label sheet, how many rows are on this sheet, and then specifically the height, the width of each of those labels, and the margin. So that way we can get it exactly lined up to print onto your label sheet. And most label sheets should have that documentation with it, specifically, these measurements. Some of them, you can create a default. We have some of them in ARM already the Avery labels, kind of have a very specific, they just assigned a number to it, and it's got that very specific setup to it. And so you can see as I click on different ones, if the 5161 looks like it's only got 2 columns, so it's a little wider. Just depending on what label you have, then some of these are already in ARM. You could just simply click on, and it's got that memory of what that looks like. And then it'll just change here. You can see the spacing, how much bigger that label is than the one we were looking at previously. So if your label is in this list, nice and easy just to click on it and you're good to go. Or you can enter in the information that you have for your label, and then you can actually save a new default. And that will be specific for a label default here in this list, and it'll add to the ones that are available here for you. And that way you're only doing that once. All right, so these container labels are, as that kind of tells us, we have one per treatment line. So depending on your treatment list, here's an example. My treatment number 5 actually has 2 components to it. And so I actually will have 2 different labels be generated for that particular treatment because it has 2 different components in the list. So depending on what object that you're trying to label, it can be important kind of what is being selected. So this one here, I guess it is still just doing the treatment. Yep, the treatment lines. I didn't know since it said application if it'd be a combination, but it's just saying it's including the application code in the contents of the label. We do have the multi-row. So ones that say multi-row, here you can see treatment 1 application A, treatment 1 application B, treatment 1 application C. So you get a label for each treatment times application code combination. So you can see that kind of repeats. So each of these treatments were applied 3 different times. So we'll have 3 separate labels for each of those applications. Just glancing at plots, of course, it's just 1 per plot. So for each plot number in your trial, of course, there's a label. Pretty straightforward there. And then finally you get seed packets. In here it's looking at my treatment list, and there are no variety treatments or seed treatments in my treatment list. So ARM's asking, does it even make sense to generate one? I'm going to say yes, please, just so we can visualize it, but chances are it doesn't mean much to us. But there, again, is one in this case for each plot for the seed packet. And then harvest is fairly similar for each plot. This one is pooled 1 per treatment instead. So using the heading here combined with kind of looking at the preview can give you a sense of what you're generating, how many labels you'll end up getting for that particular trial to make sure it matches with what it is that you are labeling. Couple more features to point out. Some of these labels have barcodes. Looks like I might have to zoom in a little bit for this particular one. And so it'll have the term barcode in the title to draw attention to that. And so here we have a barcode. It's pretty short because it's just, in this case, it's just the plot number is the barcode. Here in this case, the barcode is the trial and the treatment, so it's a little bit longer. So it's got the barcode itself, and I actually can see the text underneath it to kind of show me. It looks like it's the trial ID, and then it's the treatment number, and then the plot number is kind of made up of these barcodes. So that can be useful. And the barcodes themselves are actually just fonts. So something I had no idea how barcodes work, but it's really just a particular font for text. So you can go into the I think it's the print setup. It might be the page setup options in ARM to set which font you would want to use for barcodes. So if you had a particular one that your scanner reads, you can set that there in your ARM options. I think it's under the File tab, Page Setup or Print Setup. I can't remember which one has the fonts. And there's a specific one for what barcode font are you using. So that'll be any of these that have barcode in the name can generate a barcode for you. Then the other example was subsamples. I am guessing here in the plot probably. Sample would be the word I'm kind of looking for here. So when you generate, or in my case, I'm previewing a sample label here, then there is a dialog that will come up to help us define the sample. So essentially, if I want to label label's the wrong term. If I want to give a name to the different subsamples that I'm generating, I can type them in and I just simply put them on different lines. And I'm just pressing enter in between to go to another line. So in this case, it will generate our large plot number labeling. For each plot in my trial, it's going to give me 3 different labels, and the data for the sample is going to be what I've entered here. In my case, I'm very not terribly creative. We'll just say 1, 2, 3. And so when I press OK, maybe zoom out just a little bit so we can see that for plot 101, now I have a label. Not a lot here other than that text that I entered, sample has call number 1, sample number 2 for plot 101. Then the next label is still 101, sample 3. And then we continue on with 102, 1, 2, 3. So whatever text you enter there, if I go options and then back to preview, it'll start all over. Certainly if it really is just a numerical subsampling, however many you have, you would just enter the number all the way down. But if you did want to give them a name for whatever reason, that is how you would accomplish that. And again, you're generating multiple labels then for each plot in this case. So that kind of the keyword for finding those would be sample in the text there. And this one has a barcode. So this might be a good example. Let's see if it includes, yep, it includes that sample name in the barcode itself. So that would be a case where if that name of that sample really matters, it'll be included in that barcode. So lots of options, of course, just kind of trying to have a lot of flexibility in ARM to cover a lot of different scenarios. Another question. So most of this, these examples, we're kind of assuming you have a label sheet, roughly the 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, but instead it has the labels itself as a label sheet that you're printing off. But it is also possible if you have a continuous, I've also seen it called a roll printer, kind of like this one here. I'll just expand to, I don't know, that didn't really help. where instead of having one sheet with a bunch of labels on it, it just generates a label one at a time, essentially. This is a very, very small little office one, but of course they can get quite large. It is possible to print out to one of those as well. Really, the trick to it is simply just to kind of trick ARM into thinking the page size is that small. So instead of a page that has a bunch of different labels on it, the page actually can only fit one label, is really what we're telling ARM to do, and ARM will just be happy to make a document that has a whole bunch of pages that contains, each page is one label, and that works perfectly fine to generate those labels on a printer like this. And so that's really the trick, is just saying that there's one column and there's one row. You'll want, of course, the height and the width of the label to be what your label is, and then set the margins to 0 as well. And then the only other trick is to change your paper size. So in ARM, if I close out of this, file, print, setup, it's really the only trick then would be for whatever printer you have, you can go into the properties and change the size. And this dialog will depend entirely on the printer you have. This one's kind of a make-believe one. I've got just an office printer here that I can at least show that it'll change depending on what printer you've selected. And somewhere in here, there'll be an option to choose the page size. And that's really where you would go for ARM to believe that there's only a very small size for the page. And then when we're generating that label, it'll simply think, oh, there's only room for one. And so it'll only put one on that page because it's very small and give you a whole bunch of pages. So that's the process for that type of printer. All right, last topic related to labels. Not going to go through all of this. We don't really have time, but I do just want to point out something that maybe was on your mind a little bit as we looked at these different labels. And you say, boy, those are great, but I really would rather not have the stage here. And can I make the name bold and in red? And that's sort of kind of how we got this long list, is just slowly built it larger and larger based on requests that people have had. Of course, then it was time that we'd have to squeeze in for the programmers to build it, put it in the next version, et cetera, et cetera. So what we did then was we kind of left this list here just fine and dandy, but we added the ability to basically just export what the label information that you have to be able to create your own labels somewhere else. Here in ARM, we call it the raw data labels, is kind of the name of it. You're exporting the raw information to create a data label. Again, that's kind of the tagline of, if you like to tweak, make it your own, include what you want to include on it. This is the way to go then. And so ARM is just going to create a file that has the information you need to hook it up to some sort of label software and create your own labels. And so, depending on what it is you're trying to generate, much like we had different categories of built-in labels, we have different categories of which information is going to go out. And then it is kind of up to you on what label software you might use. Surprisingly, Microsoft Word actually works very well. So typically, we could spend half of a session ourselves showing that process. So we won't go through that, but just to show that it is possible. We have a nice write-up, kind of a step-by-step how to export it in ARM, and then use mail merge within Word. Works perfectly fine to do this. Let me zoom in a little bit. Not that we're going to do the steps, but just so we can kind of see what we're actually talking about here. Use mail merge within Word to connect that file, put in the information and format it however you'd like. And then once you set up that template once, then you can use that label template again and again. And you simply just connect that Word document to a new outputted label file for each of your trials. It's really slick. I'll admit, when we first added this feature, and I didn't know how to do it, I was like, geez, that looks like a lot of work. How am I going to make it seem simple to train people how to do it? And after the first time of kind of poking through this process, I was like, wow, this is actually really slick. So just, I guess, maybe an advertisement too. If it's a goal of yours, it would be helpful for you. I would encourage you, give it a try at least, because it gets pretty smooth once you've actually gotten your hands on it. But we don't have time today to show all of that. We have a video in addition to this PDF that kind of shows you those steps if you're interested in learning it. I'll also include this link with the recording in case you're curious. And then there's just this kind of a handout that goes with that process for how to connect up the different data points. And it's possible to also do your own barcodes and your own subsamples as well. I guess I should say it's possible to include barcodes in your own custom spreadsheet. It's not quite as easy for subsamples currently. If that is a goal of yours, send us an email. I think I have a macro in Excel that would work, but I haven't had a group brave enough to try it with me yet. So anyway, that's kind of a one step farther on labeling if you want to go that route. But just to recap that here within ARM, it's just in the print reports. You can certainly use any of these labels, and once you set things the way you want them, it's just like the regular reporting stream, if you will, that you can double click or press add to put it in your report set. For a label, you probably really only want the one label in your list. It's not going to work very well to print an AOV report on label sheets. So stick to the one report set, and then you simply just move to the next page and then send it out to your label printer. So really kind of the same process once you've made that selection and configuration of your label. All right. Well, that's all I've got on labels and weather. Normally I've already went a minute or two over, but we had a minute to spare if there were any questions. But if not, I appreciate you guys taking time to join us today. And maybe we'll see you next week. We've got one more session on the docket for next week at this time, reporting in general tips and tricks. So. All right. Well, thanks everybody.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.
Bye.